Good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday morning, November 19th, 2025, and it's time for the Patriot Pulse podcast. And as you all know, we also simulcast to Two Guys Drinking Coffee. So we're still on there. And it is episode, I'm just going back, I'm not going to try to figure out episodes back and forth. This is actually our 234th episode since we turned the camera on in that coffee shop, actually the iPhone on in that coffee shop almost 5 years ago. Can you believe that, Jim? It's coming up on 5 years ago that we started being pissed off in front of the camera. So, hey, it is the third Wednesday of the month, and that means it is time to bring on our economic guru, Jim M. And I got to tell you, I've been struggling to find a catchy name for the third Wednesday of the month when we welcome Jim M back to the podcast. So one dawned on me yesterday. Let me throw it out there and see if it sticks to the wall. But it made sense to me because Jim brings us information about movements and activities in the economic world that may be harbingers of trouble ahead. So the name I think we're going to give this and future episodes with Jim is Econ Recon. What thoughts? Nobody. Econ.
That works.
I thought it was
it's a reconnaissance mission for sure.
Yeah, Econ Recon. So that's what our third Wednesday in the month is going to be called from now on. So I got to admit, the information that Jim, that you bring to us doesn't bode well for a bright future. However, it's important that we look at events and information in order to decide how we will respond to what is happening in the world of money, banking, and the economy. Because regardless of whether we like it or not, we all are subject to what's going on in there. We all have to use money. We all have to pay attention to what goes on with the banks. It's said that information is power, but I say information is potential power. It all depends on what we do with it. So the power comes in the action that we take after we get the information.
True.
So take what you hear in these podcasts, and especially with Jim here coming and giving us information on the economy and money and all of that, and use it to make your personal decisions about how you might prepare and move forward. Just kind of a little introduction to today. But so without any further ado, let's rip the Band-Aid off and let Jim take it away. So what words of wisdom do you have for us, Jim?
Well, the first word of wisdom is that this is not doom and gloom, folks. This is reality, or at least perspectives on reality. If you go back in history, for example, into the 1920s, especially the later 1920s, some people saw the Great Depression coming and they took actions. And I had a contractor here probably 15 years ago doing some work on the house. And he said his grandmother was one of the people that saw it coming. And everyone laughed at her. But you know what? 2 years later, they're all coming to her asking for food. She prepared, she saw it coming, and she was in a position that, one, she was fine herself, and she was able to help others. So it's not doom and gloom. I mean, if you see what's happening, you can take precautions. Was it doom and gloom that Joseph said there was a famine coming in the Bible?
I was just going to bring that up.
Was it doom and gloom that Noah said it was going to rain? For those that chose not to listen and or do any investigation on their own, it was pretty bad for them. But those that actually said, wait a second, what's this guy saying? Did their own research, followed up, and they did much, much better. In fact, they say during the Great Depression, up to that point, there were more millionaires created in the United States during the Great Depression than at any other time in the history of the country, up until like about that point. But so it's all a matter of what you do. But If you do okay, always remember money is simply a tool. It is simply a tool. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. That's up to you. If the Lord blesses you, I strongly suggest you try to use it for good. So, okay,
All right.
shall we dig in?
Yeah, let me do a little shout out here. We got already this morning. We got Diane and we got Tom and Mick is on here with us. I know there's other people on, but they haven't made comments. So I'm seeing some other numbers. So thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm sorry, Jim. I just wanted to give them a shout out. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to hit you. Let me preface this too, that if anybody, I always reference post numbers. That way people can see what I'm seeing. And so if folks want to, you can go to Discerning the Times on the Facebook. Periodically, they attack me and shut me down, but I'm up and running at this moment. And actually on the Discerning Times class on Monday night, it literally, a couple of people saw it. It looked like my computer was taken over. We had to completely shut down the class and try to restart it with new links. So apparently we might be over the target, so to speak. But you can go to Discerning the Times. There's different episodes, and you can see all the post numbers. So let's start with the big headline news that probably 90% of people have no idea what's going on. Although if I think back and I look back through my notes, we did talk a little bit about this, but a lot has happened in the last month, is that we have a massive banking crisis going on that most folks don't know about it. So what would be the evidence of that statement? Post 1640 would be that last week, the Federal Reserve, along with 25 of the biggest banks in this country, got together and held a meeting on the topic of funding issues, liquidity issues in the banking system. Now, do we know all the details of what they talked about? Of course not. But we also know that Trump held a luncheon with the top CEOs of the biggest banks as well. So when those two things happen in the same week, you start to wonder something might be going on. So that would be the big thing. In terms of yes.
just briefly explain liquidity as it pertains to the economy.
Okay, so liquidity is this. If you have $1,000 in your wallet right now, you have liquidity. If you have $0 in your wallet right now, you have no liquidity. Okay, so liquidity is there's money in the system or there's not money in the system.
Oh, okay. So
and what's happening right now behind in the banking system is that the banking system is running out of liquidity, meaning it's running out of cash to move around. Why is this important? Well, people need loans. If there's no money to move around, people can't get loans. Sometimes this can be caused, and typically this is what it is. Let me go back and use an example. So the banks are required to hold a certain amount of reserves on their books. What does that mean? If you deposit $100 in the bank is required to at least hold on to a couple of those dollars. Actually, during COVID, they dropped it all the way down to zero. So that tells you something there.
Well, did they reverse that? Because it was, I thought it was still zero.
I still think it is zero, but I think the banks still have to have something on their books, if for no other reason than to fund daily operations amongst, within their own bank. I mean, if you're PNC Bank, you have to have some cash in your vault, so to speak.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is it uncommon that the president gets with the banks, though?
It happens periodically. But typically speaking, when it's, it periodically happens. In reality, it probably shouldn't happen very often. If our government is separate from the corporate world, you really don't want the two talking to each other.
Okay, just curious.
So anyhow, so if I'm PNC Bank and I need to have, $1 billion on hand to fund my customers for the next day or something, and I happen to fall below that to 900 million, I might call up Northwest Bank in the middle of the night and say, I need 100 million. Can you lend it to me overnight? And Northwest said, yeah, we have an extra 100 million. I'll lend it to you. And that goes on all the time behind the scenes. So some of what we're going to get to is that there's indications that that's not working very well right now, that the banks are short on cash. So one person brings up, and this is post 1591, to put this all in perspective. They go, When this last happened in 2019, and a lot of people forget about it, most folks don't even know about it, but in September of 2019, we had a major banking crisis. I followed it very closely back then. Most people never knew about it. But when this last happened in 2019, COVID made it possible to give taxpayers $1,200 COVID stimmy checks and a couple of economic stimulus checks after that to put 2.5 trillion into the system. There's no COVID this time. So they thought they could use, for example, this person's opinion, a tariff dividend, or now a tariff dividend, but that seems to be an existential jeopardy from the Supreme Court and so forth. But that's a little bit of a quote there. The question is, how do they get a couple $1 trillion into the economy before it seizes up and collapses? That is what many believe the Fed is discussing right now. Because the last time this happened, we had this amazingly coincidental COVID thing happen, and that allowed them to inject trillions into the system. Right now, we don't have that.
You might be headed towards this, but I want to ask the question, because you're talking about injecting money into the system, and I didn't see it in your notes. I might have missed it.
Yeah.
But we talked at breakfast yesterday about $10 trillion being injected before the end of the year or something like that.
Well, Jay Bravo is a gentleman I follow. In fact, on Monday night's class, there was a gentleman up in Buffalo that joined us who's familiar with him as well. We've shared his picture on the show a few times. He's the guy with the spiky hair in the middle. He was a college professor, a high school economics teacher. He's got like 6 daughters, a wife, moved from California to, I think it's Texas or Florida.
Is he the one that I always say looks like he saw Nancy Pelosi naked?
Could be him. He commented that he had an inside source that connected with him that said they're planning to inject 20 trillion possibly by Christmas.
20 trillion?
20 trillion is the number that he put up on his page. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. However, the fact that they want to inject money in is no secret, because if you think about it, Trump has been calling for lower interest rates for months now, since actually he took office. So he's been wanting money injected into the system ever since he's been in office. Now there's more calls for money to be injected because people are starting to see some issues. So there is an issue going on out there. Something is happening. We don't know exactly what, but I'm going to try to explain what that might be, where the evidence right now is suggesting where it is. So 2 words I want to throw out here before we go any farther. Private equity and private credit. So if this is Sesame Street, today is brought to you by the words private equity and credit.
The letter
What
P
is that?
and E.
What's that?
The letter E, equity.
Okay, there you go. So what is that? Let's say, for example, Fred, you're a bank. But well, actually, let me go back one step. Fred's not a bank. I'm a bank. So we'll say I'm a bank. And I would like to give Jim over there a loan because he's got a business. And or I would like to buy stock in his company because he has a business. But in 2008, after that crisis, regulations were put in place that did not allow banks to do those types of loans anymore. And there's a little twist on some of this. Riskier loans. Let's put it this way, riskier loans. Because remember with the mortgage-backed securities?
Well, sure, they are all collapsed.
Yeah, they collapsed. So it stems kind of back to that. I'm trying to simplify stuff here. So the bank's like, well, we'd still kind of like to do this, but we can't. So they go to Fred, who's a private company, non-financial institution, non-depository financial institution,
like a private
NDFI.
equity firm, like a private equity firm that invests in companies. They're all over the place.
That is what NDFIs are. They're non-depository financial institutions, private equity. So they go to Fred, or they don't go to Fred, but Fred talks to Jim, and Fred wants to give Jim the money here, and he's an NDFI, private equity, and he contacts me. I give Fred a loan, and then Fred gives you a loan, Jim. Fred is simply the middleman. The same thing is happening like it did back in 2006, 2007. It's just there's a middleman involved now called private equity or private credit. What's the difference between the two? If Fred takes that $1 million, let's say that I, gave to him although I don't technically know that he's giving it to you, I just gave it to Fred. If Fred invests that $1 million into your business, Jim, by buying stock, it's private equity. If he takes that $1 million and gives it to you as a loan, that's private credit. See the difference between the two?
Yeah, all right, look, just for my own clarification. I mean, I've followed people that that run private equity firms, but I thought those were made up, and this just may be my naivete. I thought those were made up of investors. In other words, take the same thing. The three of us in an alternate universe are billionaires, and we want to help entrepreneurs. So we create a private equity fund, put 300 million in for each of us. Now we've got almost $1 billion to invest in private companies. But
it can be that way as well.
Okay, so what you're saying though is there are firms that may not have the capital but get loans from banks, and how do they do that if they don't have collateral?
Well, Fred's talking with you, and Jim, you say you give me that $1 million, I'm going to give you 10% return on that money every year. Fred can act a little bit like a loan shark here and ask for more money or more return on his investment. It all works well, and you get wonderful profits while it does, until, Jim, for example, not to pick on your business, but let's say, for example, your business starts to fall into tough times. Maybe the economy is slowing, and now you can't make those loan payments anymore. And so now it comes back to the NDFI where they're not getting their money. And what we're seeing is that is what is starting to happen, but it gets more complicated. So you brought up, and I'm going to jump through some notes here I'm going to go straight to the private equity.
Sure, go ahead.
You're following
the
notes here. So this has started to show up recently. And I'm just going to list a couple of things, and then I'll go through and explain a little bit more about what's happening here. So if you know about CarMax, they're a used car dealership, so to speak, nationwide. Their stock fell 24%, and their CEO resigned. They're having issues. BlackRock, our favorite company, BlackRock, took $150 million, 100% loss on a loan for private equity or private credit. You got a couple of home builders. For example, let's see, it's Renovo. I don't have it in my notes here, but the company is Renovo. They do a lot of home improvements out in the Southwest. They went under. And what's interesting is that these businesses one day are AAA credit rated, and the next day they're bankrupt. And we're going to talk about that in a moment, just to explain what's happening. This is where it gets a little bit bigger now. KKR has $618 billion of pension money and life insurance funds. But now they're starting to say, oh, folks, there's not a problem. Whenever a company starts to say there's not a problem, there's a problem, okay? UBS, which is another big bank, warns of systemic risk. This means it can spread everywhere. In U.S. private credit and private equity, and says they are beginning to investigate the loan rating agencies. We'll talk about that. Another post here, $1 trillion time bomb is set to go off. We had companies that are related to Marriott hotels and the Ritz-Carlton recently went under. There were stories about them kicking their guests out of their hotels in the middle of the night because once they filed for bankruptcy, they had to close up shop instantly. So let me just see if there's any other notes here. Brookfield Asset Management, $1 trillion. Here we go. Well, actually, I'll explain that instead of trying to read it. And then pension funds and insurance companies are trapped in $1 trillion of private equity and zero return. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is for your listeners who have not been hearing this or And the reality is that it is now starting, as one of the folks I follow, he says he feels a little bit vindicated because for about a month now, he has been pounding the drums on this topic, and he is now starting to see it make it to the headlines, mainly because it was difficult for them to cover up the Fed meeting with the largest banks in the country. That kind of set off a lot of red alarms. So
Is that Greg Manorino?
no, actually, there's this new gentleman called, his show is Ox Talks.
Now, we saw some of this coming, right? Because remember, what year was the bank bailouts?
The big one was
2008?
2008, 2009.
Right. Now, see, there was rumors that they were doing that so that they could get rid of all of the smaller banks so that they could have power banks that would control everything. To me, I think that was a move to try to push digital currency, but that's just me.
Well, okay, if you're talking, that might be the more recent one, 2023.
Right.
And if you're following what's happening, almost every week about 50 banks close around the country. Now, that's not 50 separate banks. That's 50 bank locations. We have about 4,000 locations around the country. So you can, if you close 50 a week, you lose, and it's not always 50 a week, but gradually those numbers are going down. And so there is a consolidation to fewer actual banks on your street corner. And what will also happen is that there are going to simply be fewer individual banks as well, bank companies.
Right.
So
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Diane makes a good point here about accountability. Are they, these investment firms
Yes.
that are, they're taking, a lot of pensions are invested in these firms. Are they just, is this just mismanagement? Are they taking riskier ventures on?
Okay, so that's a great question. This is definitely riskier stuff. That's absolutely certain. So go back to 2008. After that all blew up, they put in place regulations to prevent this sort of thing from happening. Over the last 15 years, and in particular, if you think back, and I didn't know the details of it, and I'm not blaming him per se because they're all in on it. But during Trump's first administration, he introduced wide-ranging, sweeping deregulation. Remember that? He cut out tons of regulations. I remember that very distinctly. I couldn't tell you all the details. Some of it had to deal with gas and oil drilling. That's the stuff that always made the news. But it also allowed this sort of thing to happen again. They deregulated like the non-depository financial institutions. They gave them a lot more leeway to make riskier bets. But it wasn't just underneath him. Obama was doing some of the same stuff too. But that big deregulation bill was the straw that pushed the camel over the straw that broke the camel's back, because once that went through, the NDFs grew exponentially in the last 7-8 years. And so now we have this problem again, just like the mortgage-backed security thing grew massively from the year 2000, like 2007 or so, before it blew up. And now we're seeing the same thing starting to blow up. So here's where it gets really interesting to kind of get into some of the meat and potatoes, just to show you how corrupt this thing is. Okay. So if I'm an NDFI, and I'm not going to pick on any of you guys, I'll say Nick. I'll say his name is Nick for NDFI. I want to make loans out to these riskier companies because I want a high rate of return on my money back, because the banks aren't paying any money in the savings accounts, 3% or whatever, or less, or 0% almost. But this company over here says they can give me 10% return on my investment. So I'm going to try to get it. So I need money to do that. So I got my original investors, like you mentioned, Jim. Maybe I can go to the banks and borrow some money that way. But what if I wanted to get a steady stream of money? And let me put this in perspective. Private equity and private credit, they're buying up hospitals now. They're buying up home developers all over the place. So they're buying up everything, okay? What if, let me ask you this question. Who has a nice steady stream of income that I could use to finance these loans?
Insurance companies.
You got it. Insurance companies, life insurance companies, maybe pension funds that always have a nice steady stream of money coming in. What's that, Fred?
Big Pharma too.
It could be them as well. I mean, there's no limits to what it could be. But if you're a life insurance company, for example, you have X amount of premiums coming in every single month. So you buy the insurance company and take those premiums to fund your risky investments. Okay. So in the last couple of years, like the roughly top 50 insurance companies, or the 50 big insurance companies in this country, are owned by 12 private equity credit firms.
Now, when you're saying the private equity credit firms, is that like BlackRock and Vanguard, or are they in a different category?
I think they're in a different category because they're so big. Okay. So these private equity credit firms, they now own like 50 of the biggest insurance companies in this country.
Right.
Okay. And those premiums are now going to fund these risky investments, or could be. Only time will tell exactly what is happening. But again, you would almost think that's illegal because, the idea of having an insurance company is that your money is going to be there in case your house burns down or you die, and, things like that. Somebody gets that premium. That money is supposed to be safer. It went from safer to riskier. Okay. But it gets even more bizarre than that. Let's say, for example, Nick, who's an NDFI, one of his managers says, I think there's a great opportunity over in this area, whatever that area might be. And, Nick, the NDFI guy, he goes, okay, let's start a subsidiary. And that subsidiary will deal with widgets, okay, whatever widgets are. And then another manager says, hey, I've got a great idea for this other project. And so he says, okay, go for it. So-and-so's making widgets, you make things. Okay. And then somebody else comes along and you're making widgets. You got another subsidiary, things, and you got another one called whatchamacallits. Okay. So underneath that one private equity, you got 3 separate subsidiaries. Well, the whatchamacallits say, I see the thing subsidiary is actually doing pretty good right now. I'm going to buy some stock in them. So they buy stock in that subsidiary. And then that subsidiary says, hey, the other one's doing, okay, maybe I got this extra money. Maybe I'll invest some money in that other subsidiary. And then the other subsidiary goes around to the first one and says, hey, they did really well. But the reason they did very well is because they invested in the other one and they got a nice return. And so now they invest in that one. Do you see what is starting to happen? All the money is going around in a circle, all within the same. It would be like us. If Fred, you came to me and he said, and I said I wasn't going to do that. So, but you got this circular motion where let's say, for example, it's all stock. They're bidding up each other's stocks, but it's all within the same organization. So there really isn't any growth. It's all fake.
Right.
What happens if one of those subsidiaries starts to have hard times? Then that's going to fall. That's going to cause the other ones to fall. And what looked once like a wonderful thing has collapsed virtually overnight. That seems to be what we might be seeing as well. But it gets worse. Okay. And this is exactly out of the playbook of the 2008 financial crisis, which, by the way, if nobody has ever watched The Big Short, they talk about all these things, or most of these things. And in particular, there is a scene about this one. So in 2007, everyone saw that the bonds were starting to fail. People were missing their mortgage payments. Things were not going right. And some of the people that were betting against the mortgage, I'll put it this way, some of the people that saw this coming placed bets against those bonds, expecting them to go down. And if they went down, they would make money. Yes, folks, it is possible. You can make money on stocks and bonds going up. And if you place your bets right, it can go down. Wall Street is a casino. It is not so much investment anymore. It's a casino.
Gamble.
If you understand that concept, a lot more of these things make sense. So they were wondering, the bonds were going down, but the ratings were not. And so they went to one of the big rating agencies, which at that time was like Moody's. And there was 3 big ones back then. And they talked to the lady behind the desk there and started asking questions. If the bonds are failing, why aren't the ratings coming down? In a long story short, it came out in that discussion that where she says, well, if this bank came to me with these bonds and wanted a AAA credit rating, if I don't give it to them, they're just going to go down the street to my competitor who will give them a AAA rating on those bonds. So in other words, the ratings were falsified. The ratings were bought and paid for. They were no longer independent. So today, fast forward to today, it would appear when we see companies like Tricolor and First Brands that were AAA rated credit, and the next day they are completely bankrupt, people are starting to do a little investigating. And what they have found is that the big the big credit rating agencies like Moody's, they're being watched closely. However, in the last 15 years or so, dozens, I heard as many as 50 smaller rating agencies have arisen. And it would appear that what can't be done with the big 3 because they're being watched closely is now happening with those smaller ones, just like it did in 2007. So these NDFIs wanted to invest in widgets. The widgets company looked a little shaky. They were not getting a good credit rating. They thought, no, we don't. One agency might say that's a risky investment. That's a B rated. That's a C rated. So they went down the block, went to another credit rating, and they say, our fees are this, and we could give you a AAA credit rating on that. It's a pay-to-play thing. So it looks like these ratings have been falsified as well.
All right. So let me ask the big question in all this, because we try to bring this to our listeners in that, give them actionable information. What does all this is wonderful information, and it may make sense for somebody that's really into finance and all that. But what does this mean to Joe on the street that is working and trying to just make ends meet? And what, based on this information, what can they do, or what should they do, or what should they be watching for? And there's bring it down to the individual level here.
Okay, so I need to explain the corruption first, because if you don't understand the corruption, it doesn't make any sense why you should be concerned. Okay.
Fair enough.
So you have to understand the corruption. So this is where it becomes this is where I have to do the disclaimer. Be like the Bereans. Okay. Do your own research, draw your own conclusions, make your own decisions, and live with the consequences. This is only starting to show up. Many believe there's a lot more to it, and how it plays out is anyone's guess. So this is not financial advice or anything else like that. If you have money invested, if you have money anywhere, actually, Jim, we said this for a long time. Don't trust anyone. Okay. We have long time said, in the bigger picture, this is all fake. This is all facade. Right. Okay. And so in that sense, don't trust anyone. Do your own research. If I would say, if you are solely counting on like Social Security, or solely counting on a pension, or whatever, or solely counting on savings in a bank, even, you better you better rethink that strategy and diversify your funds. Okay. Make sure there's an old farmer's phrase. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, because if that basket gets dropped, you lose all your eggs. Right. And now that's where it becomes personal. Everyone's financial situation is different. You have to decide what is right for you. If you have no savings, then this isn't going to affect you. If you have $100,000 in savings, or if you have $10,000 in savings, or if you have $1 million in savings, you're going to have to look at your situation. What are your expenses and so on and so forth. My biggest general rule, and Jim, I've said this for 15 years, probably since 2008, 2009, when I woke up to what was going on, reduce your cost of living as much as possible, diversify your funds as much as possible. And possibly the next thing I'm going to add in here, but before I give the answer, which isn't going to shock anyone, I want to preface it with what is probably going to happen next. We have known for at least a year, because Trump says it himself, that he wants low interest rates. He wants, as he phrased, and it's a great video, give me that free money. Because he says you can make more money on free money than you can on expensive money. He wants lower interest rates. He wants to pump this whole thing up again. If you remember Saturday Night Live, you had Hans and Franz, and we're here to pump you up. I would say that is Trump and Jerome Powell. They want to pump this thing up. They have to just do it in a way that it doesn't look too suspicious. However, if these are the problems happening behind the scenes, the banks are going to need a bailout. Something is going to happen that allows them to pump money into the system. We heard about trade. I'm sorry, Fred, what were you going to say?
The thing is, this is the oldest hustle in the book. It would be like if all of us owed each other $40 a piece. You give him 20 because you owe him 20. He pays me 20 and I pay you 20. In the end, $20 pays for everything. It's the oldest trick in the book. And insurance is a scam if you really look at it. I know a guy who's very well off. He's never paid for insurance because he offers cash to the doctors. He gets his bills paid cheaper than the people who are carrying insurance. And then what do? They introduce the Obama Act where they force you to have insurance so you get fined. It's all a scam to keep the money flowing.
Oh, yeah, it is. And that's that whole healthcare stuff. I could talk about that all day long because I've had very interesting experiences with that whole thing. But that's kind of a different topic. But so most likely, if this continues to grow, which it looks like it's going to, because Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase of 19 years, one of the largest banks by assets in the world, came out when Tricolor and First Brands first filed for bankruptcy. He said, when you see one roach, there's probably more. And since then, we have seen at least a half a dozen to a dozen more roaches, and probably more we don't even know about.
I've seen that in the projects.
What's that?
I said I've seen that in the projects. I have roaches everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So they're out there, and it looks like they're starting to come to the surface, so to speak. So I would, if I was a betting man, and I don't place bets, at least not gambling bets. Maybe I'll make investments based on decisions, but not just a bet per se. They're going to print some money here. They're looking for a way to inject money into the system. They can do it by lowering interest rates. It's coming. It can be from borrowing more money, printing more money. That's happening. I don't know if we talked about the last time, but the federal deficit went up $1 trillion in 2 months. That's the fastest pace on record and accelerating. So there's going to be a cash infusion. Could there be, like that first quote? Think about it. When this happened in 2019, in the spring of 2020, we had, excuse me, if something like that happened again. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But there is a wonderful interview. It's post 1633 for folks that want to go there. You can listen to it. But this Frank Giostra, I really liked him. He was talking with Danielle Hobon from ITM Trading, I think it is. And he spoke very clearly, very calmly. And he would say things like, this is what I see coming. He goes, I've been right for the last 5-10 years. This is what I see coming. He goes, it is what it is. And you just do what you feel that you need to do. Very calm, very, very just peaceful. Say it nonchalantly. This is what it is. He said, and this is a bigger picture, and we talked about it. He said, if they try to pump a large amount of money into the system, all hell will end up breaking loose. Now, that doesn't mean it'll happen overnight, but he goes, that will cause massive inflation. That will cause debasement of the US dollar. He goes, this is not the past anymore. He goes, the world is tired of the United States printing money. China and the BRIC nations, the ASEAN network, which is like the Asia, Southeast Asia, there's 20 nations within that group. They have their system. In fact, they just tested with 185 countries their what's it called? M-Bridge system, which is basically, it counters the West SWIFT system doing business. That system is pretty much built. They're testing it. They're trying it out, not full scale yet, but 185 countries are connected into it. He goes, if the United States tries to print a bunch of money, the world will walk away. They're done with us. And one of the things that really helped the world walk away, Biden did tons of stuff to help this, but the tariffs were like kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. The nations of the world simply said, we're not going to play these games. If you want to do a policy, that's one thing. If you want to do tariffs by tweet, we're not interested. We're walking away at this point. So if they try to print a bunch of money, you better have your money in non-dollar denominated assets. Or what I have said, Jim, and we have talked about for a long time, you better have it in biblical, constitutional, historical, ethical, financial, economical money.
Yeah.
Because that will be the last man standing in all of this.
Yeah, but that's what I was trying to.
Translation, that's gold and silver.
You got it.
Right.
I'm just going to give all the reasons why you should, because I can't think of any reason why you wouldn't at this point. And there's plenty of places online. You can store it in a vault someplace. You can store it in the middle of the Allegheny National Forest if you want. You can do whatever you want to do with it. If you're into Bitcoin, you got what's it called? Gold coin, which is, one of those coins is equal to 1 ounce of gold. So you can do it that way, which one would say is where we're ultimately heading. We will get our digital IDs. We will get our digital currencies. The East is going to probably back it by gold and silver and or other commodities. They've been very clear. Putin has said that from day one. They're setting up a system that's going to be backed by gold, silver, and commodities. Frank Giostra, he commented, his advice to people is gold, farmland, and Bitcoin. That's what his advice is. And he said, he goes, let's be real serious about this. If humanity survives, we will see a series of more localized financial systems around the globe rise up.
Right.
And I would say that looks a lot to me like the 10 kings out of Revelation. That would be my perspective on that. But his key thing was if humanity survives, because these transitions never go down easy. Then he was very clear in the video. He goes, China is rising, the U.S. is falling. He goes, let's be very clear about it. They're gonna fight it out. They're gonna nuke it out. And the person who wins is the one that's going to write the new rules. And that's what he sees happening.
What I was trying to make, my point I was trying to make about that $20 deal paying everybody's $40, I believe it's the same thing with our banks. Say all of us are worth $1 million. They're not going to give us all $1 million at one time because they only got $1 million to give. But they're telling you you're worth that, and they're just going to spread that $1 million amongst all three of us going back and forth because they're not going to give it to you because they don't have it.
Well, that's, you can't blame the banks completely in as much as if you ever saw the movie The Wonderful Life, with Jimmy Stewart. There's a run on the bank and it takes place like during the Great Depression. And he goes, the person says, I want all my money. He goes, I don't have it all. You gave me money and that was the loan for John over here who bought his house. It's in his house or it's in his car, that sort of thing. So So the banks only hold a small percentage. In fact, historically speaking, it's called fractional reserve banking, which means if you gave $100 to the bank, $90 of that was lent out, and 10% stayed at the bank.
Right.
Fractional reserve banking. So the banks never have all your cash on hand.
And what I mean by that, another thing is what I mean is, it's like if we were smart in the way we invest in stuff, we'd probably be better off, well off. I mean, by now, by a long time. Because I'll give you a good example. I mean, I've probably had the same job for 35 years now. I have. And I didn't have to use my insurance until I was in my late 40s. But I paid from 18 until the late 40s and never really using it. So they were getting rich off of all those extra payments, of you never even cashing in on it. Think about that. Think how much money they made off the average American buying in the insurance and spending money that they didn't have, that they didn't even need to spend.
Well, insurance is one of those things. I mean, I remember a person when I was in high school, a fellow student, his dad worked for an insurance company. He made a statement to me that really struck me as interesting. He goes, when you buy life insurance, let's say you take out $100,000 policy, he goes, what are you really saying? And we all just looked like we have no idea what he was talking about. He goes, you're telling the insurance company you expect to die. And when the insurance company writes that policy, they're saying to you, they don't think you're going to die.
Right.
Because why would you take out an insurance policy if you thought you were going to live? Because you would have no use for it. And why would an insurance company write you a policy if they thought you were going to die? Because they would lose money. So it's really an interesting way you look at it. I mean, it's like that always stuck with me. Like, actually it wasn't large, but I just cashed in a life insurance policy recently. It was a little extra money. It helped. It, pays for funeral expenses and so forth like that. But that's the bet you're taking. Now, here's the thing, and this is where people can decide for themselves what's going to happen. If the economy does well, and in theory, we're being told it's the best economy we've ever had. However, some of the statistics would say otherwise, and I wish to spend maybe 5 minutes just rattling off some stuff here, and then people can make their own decision. Because if the economy is doing well, then businesses should grow, they should expand, they should hire. There won't be a liquidity crisis because when people are doing well, money is moving around. What's that, Jim?
Before you move on, I just want to ask one fundamental question. All these shenanigans that are going on, are they illegal? And if so, why aren't people going to jail for this?
True.
Well, part of that, I guess, and we talked a little bit about bills and are they constitutional? It's interesting because so it looks like with NDFIs, and I didn't even think to pull up a chart. I do have a chart that just shows they exploded since like 2017. That all happened because of deregulation. There was that big bill that was passed, and back in like 2017, it deregulated a lot of things. And so this all became legal again at that point. It's interesting. Was that constitutional? It probably was, because the government really should have no say in how a business conducts its business, other than if they're blatantly breaking some kind of a law. But so that bill in 2017, a lot of that was probably very much constitutional, because the government should not be involved in private enterprise. What's that old phrase? Buyer beware. So it would appear that most of this is legal. Go back to 2008. It virtually crashed the entire economic system of the world, but no banker ever went to jail. Where it could get interesting, let me just finish this thought.
Yeah, go ahead. I have one more.
If those rating companies falsified the ratings, and that could be proven that by any reasonable level, that loan should not have been a AAA, it should have been a B-, then that would be fraud. Okay, that would definitely be fraud, and so someone there should go to jail. That did happen in 2008. Nobody went to jail. Okay. The other thing is, within the private equity firms and so forth, if their regulations, if their bylaws, their internal bylaws state one thing and they're doing something different, then that would be breaking the law. If the CEOs of the insurance companies are aware of fraudulent things because they're now owned by the private equity companies and they don't speak up, like an insider, and if they don't speak up, then they could possibly be held accountable. However, even if they are breaking the law, which I would say with those rating agencies, they probably are, from what I'm hearing, like they did in 2007, 2006, and so forth. None of them ever went to jail. Nobody went to jail. So one could argue, possibly, if you want to go down the conspiracy route, James, we played that, and Fred, you were probably there as well. We played that interview with Paul Jankowski. He was a representative from Pennsylvania, from the Scranton area. He was on C-SPAN, and he made a phrase: someone threw us into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and we're just trying to see if we can make it to the nearest shore. So the question is, conspiracy theory, was this all planned? We have often talked about a reset. We have often talked about things are going to fall apart at some point. What has been done is so stupid, it couldn't have been done by stupidity alone. There had to have been a plan behind it all.
Look,
Well,
yeah.
With that being said, I think America's problem is really not so much about a political party or so much about the government or so much about what the bank's doing. It's that we're so ignorant that we believe anything. So America has an ignorance problem. And a big part of that is we allow the media to tell lies and they don't go to jail for it. I think PBS, all these news people, if you tell a lie on the air, I think you should be prosecuted for it. If you did that, we'd fix a lot of the ignorance in America, because
I would say that should go for our leaders as well, because the media sometimes the media makes things up,
Yes.
but oftentimes our leaders, we've seen it so many times, they run on one platform, they get in office, and their tone completely changes.
There's so much lying on. All of them are lying now. That's the problem. All of them are lying now because all of them are lying.
So we need to protect ourselves and our loved ones the best we can.
Let me draw an analogy here a little bit. And it might be a stretch, but I still come back to the idea of, sooner or later, and you use the term reset, but sooner or later, something's got to give. Okay. Right. And the analogy I'm going to use is back when GM went bankrupt. It was during Obama's term. And they said, they used the term "too big to fail." Mm-hmm. But in true, free market enterprise, you have winners and losers. You have companies that go under for whatever reason, mismanagement, supply and demand, so on and so forth. So my argument back then was they should have let GM fail. Just let the chips fall where they may. So the drawing the analogy to this, if the government were to stay out of it, in other words, they're not going to print $20 trillion. They're not going to bail out the banks. They're not going to do this, and let the companies that have mismanaged funds and have stolen from their investors, let them fail. Would that, and I know you need a crystal ball here, but would that be the impetus for that financial reset that would bring us back to getting rid of the unconstitutional Federal Reserve, going back to constitutional money issued by the Treasury? Okay. And set us back on the right path.
Okay. So you bring up great questions there, James. So let's try to tackle this one at a time. So let's say, for example, there's a major implosion, and which looks like it's coming. I didn't get into all the statistics here, but jobs are down. Anyhow, we won't even go down that road. The economics, we are not living in the best economy ever. Okay. So it is imploding. It's going to implode. The question now becomes, Do they allow it to simply collapse? Which if they do, then a bunch of companies go out of business and we go into a Great Depression. Okay. Second option, they print the money. Okay. And if they print the money, then we get into a very inflationary period, and probably a Great Depression as well. But we'll have a lot of inflation as well. Either way, there's going to be pain. So which one will they choose is the question, because if you are in a position, if you have loved ones and you want to try to take care of yourself and your loved ones, knowing which way this goes could make a very big difference. Okay. So if they just simply let it die, boom, Great Depression. If they inflate by printing a lot of money, then we get a lot of inflation with that. So what will they most likely do is the question. Well, let's look
the
at
other way we'd be headed for the Weimar Republic.
Yeah. So let's look at history. What have they always done in the past? One, they've always printed money. Okay. It's what they do. It's what they know. And one would say it's what they want. Trump has been very clear. He wants that free money. So my bet, and Jerome Powell, central banker, he wants it too, even though they fight back and forth in the media for a nice little show. Just make sure you have lots of popcorn. Okay. So based on that statement, my bet would be they're going to print money. Okay. Right now we're hearing these tariff stimmy checks, which as an FYI, his post said they brought in trillions. No, the Treasury Department says they brought in about 200 billion. His proposal, $2,000 out, depending on exactly how that plays out, who all gets it, looks like it would run close to $500 billion, which means if they send those $2,000 tariff refunds out, we will borrow $300 billion more, pushing the debt up. In other words, they're trying to get stimmy money into the system. So that would be my bet that way. They're gonna pump this thing up because they're Hans and Franz, and they're here to pump us up. That's what I think they will do. Another idea for that's what they will do, or would do it for at least in certain circumstances. Mention this here on the air, which is very concerning to me, is this concept of state-sponsored capitalism. Okay, that is what China's had. Okay, China has tons of capitalism. You just have to belong to the Communist Party. That's all. You can open up all the businesses you want as long as you belong to the Communist Party.
Isn't that kind of what Mondami wants?
That's what Mondami wants. But we talked about this. It's what Trump wants too. We bought up U.S. Steel. We've made investments in Intel. We're buying up mining companies. He just invested $80 billion in nuclear power plants with your tax dollars, I guess. That's the only place I can figure he's getting money from, or he's borrowing it, And he said he wants to do these deals all day long. So if the U.S. government is now a supporter of state-sponsored capitalism, which, by the way, if you go to the World Economic Forum webpage, they're big fans of state-sponsored capitalism as well. So if our government now owns a bunch of companies, is there incentive to try to keep those companies afloat or to let them simply drown? My bet would be they're going to pump up those companies, which means more borrowed money. So my bet, based on that analysis, historical and recent, is that they are going to pump this thing up as much as they possibly can. Oh, another one too, as evidence. Last week, Trump introduced the concept of the 50-year mortgage. Okay, folks, this is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard in my life. It is fantastic for the banks. They will make so much interest money off of this, you can't imagine. But you also, if you bought a house at the age of 20 with a 50-year mortgage, you pay that house off at the age of 70. You are a renter your entire life. I heard a phrase, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. And that fits that phrase perfectly. Not to mention now, new statistics are coming out. The first-time home buyers are no longer in their 20s. Like if you went back 50 years ago, first-time home buyer was 28, 30, something like that. Now it's 38, even 42, I heard a statistic. So if you take a 50-year mortgage out at the age of 40, you don't pay that house off until you're 90. You'll
don't
never ever own that house. You will always be a renter.
You don't have to take a 50, do you? I thought there was an option there.
No, you're not forced to, but just the concept. But Fred, let's go back to, I'm older than you. When I grew up, you bought a car with a four-year loan.
Now they're all up.
And you put 20% down, just like you put 20% down on your house. Over time period, how many people now have a 4-year loan on their car? Not many. Not many at all.
No.
Most likely probably 5, 6, 7, 8, and they're pushing 10 now.
They're pushing 10 on.
Okay, I got you brought it. So my bet is they're going to pump this thing up. So we're going to enter into, and I want to go back to whatever Tom said, Jim, because I didn't quite read it completely. I didn't have enough time.
When you're ready, I'll bring it back up.
My bet is they are going to try to inject as much money into the system as they possibly can through one gimmick or another, or some crisis that occurs that no one ever saw coming. Okay, possibly a false flag of some sort, some way, because it's what they've done in the past. It's what they're telegraphing to us now. So that's my bet. So protect yourself against high inflation. What did Tom say? Because I think it ties in directly with this, with gold.
It's just saying it only took an act of Congress to get us off the gold standard. It would just take another really brave act of Congress to get us back on it. And I would say it would even take a bigger act of bravery to do away with the Federal Reserve. Well,
Tom's a genius there. Smart people we have here. That is the solution. Our good buddy, Greg Manarino, has made a comment for I don't know how long. He goes, we need to return purchasing power to the currency. That's what needs to happen. He advocates not for lower interest rates, but actually for higher rates, not rising quickly. Remember, when this all blows up, according to him, rates will rise uncontrollably faster and higher. But a controlled rise is what we need. Okay, just raise it up a little bit, but nice and slow and orderly, not uncontrolled. I've oftentimes used the 3 1964 dimes in a gallon of gasoline. I saw, and your audience should be familiar with that, but I saw a new one that came across that showed like 5 quarters. And they said in 1964, the minimum wage was $1.25 or 5 1964 quarters. Okay. Mm-hmm. Today, those same 1964 quarters, I could probably do the math this morning because I think it's actually even higher than what I'm going to quote to you. Those same 5 1964 quarters, because of their 90% silver content, is $45. So if we were still on the gold standard, gold and silver, our minimum wage would not be $7.25 or $10 or $15. It would be $45 an hour right now, because our money has purchasing power. Our money has silver. It's worth something. Yeah. But they trick us. They deceive us. And every time they go to lower those interest rates or print more money, that's going to make our money worth less. And Jim, we didn't mention it, but I'll throw this in. Then you get into the Cantillon effect, where we've talked about this. When you print that money, the insiders, typically the rich people, get that money first. They're able to take that money, do something with it, and make a lot of money off of it. By the time it trickles down to the average person like us, inflation has hit and has eaten up all that money and more. So when they do this money printing, when they call for lower interest rates, the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer.
Okay,
so you distrust anyone that's calling for this.
You're all right. I've got to go back to my beginning introduction there about, and you said there's no doom and gloom here, but you got to go back to the fact, and this is a fact. I don't care if you can argue it all day with politics. the wealthy make, unfortunately, those with the most money make the rules. All right. How do we, the people that aren't the rule makers, how do we make a difference in what's happening? Because we can talk all day about what's happening in this country, but until we change it, until something happens to change it, it's just going to go on business as usual. And we'll be talking about this a year from now or 2 years from now, or when it finally does collapse, we're going to be able to say, see, we told you so.
Yeah.
But when the bottom line is, I'll go political on this. Everybody, I think, my personal opinion, everybody in Congress is bought and paid for by the big money people, whoever they are. And they're never going to do anything that stops their flow of money.
True.
So again, we can talk about this all day long until somebody comes up with a solution how to revert. Maybe it isn't a solution. Maybe it's the end times and we're all going to meet Jesus up in the clouds. I don't know, but it's either going to collapse or somebody's going to come up with a solution to reverse it. And I think it's going to collapse. And then it'll be reversed on purpose.
The collapse is coming. That's a given. There's no way. I mean, mathematically, we're heading to collapse. There's no way we can get out of this. It's like the Soviet Union in the late 80s. You could see they were going to collapse. It was just a matter of when. And the rest of the world sees the U.S. is going to collapse. So it's only a matter of when. I would say that, each and every day we get closer to that point. And it looks like, could this next event be the one? This is the one. If they try to print the money, is the world simply going to walk away? And I think they will. So what do we as individuals do? So we have two aspects here. One, we have our area of our circle of our circle of concern, which we can be concerned about the big picture out here. Like I can be concerned about what's going on in the Middle East, or I can be concerned about what's going on in Ukraine or something like that. I can't do a lot about that. That's my area of concern, though. I can pray about it, which is actually very powerful, but that's about all I can do. But I also have my area of influence, which is much smaller, but that's something that I can actually do something about. So somebody once said, if you be the change you want to see.
Gandhi.
So we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, am I the change that I wish to see? And so then we have to take a look at the question of what change do we need to bring about what we want to see? Okay, so what do I have to do to help make this place a better place? This is my personal opinion. Okay. One, we got to get back to God, and that is Jesus Christ. If a politician says, I believe in God, the next question is, which one? Tell me which God you actually believe in, because God could be anything. You could have a politician out there who says, I believe in God, but they believe in Muhammad, Islam. Okay. Ask them, which God do you believe in? And then ask them, you may wish to ask them some additional questions, but anyhow, so the first thing is we need to go back to God. You need to be amazing. I don't have my Bible right next to me. It's on the counter over there. I won't run over and get to it, but you should be in the Word every day, praying every day. If you are not attending a church in person, unless you're sick, disabled, homebound, that's a different story. Online church is wonderful for that. Get that. But the church is the people, and you need to be in the church with other people. And if you are not, you are part of the problem. I probably just alienated a bunch of people. But that's the bottom line. Acts chapter 2 says, and they gathered together daily in their homes. We don't even find it. We find it acceptable not even to gather once a week on a Sunday. I can stay in my own home. And I had a conversation. I invited some people to church once walking down the road and said, why don't you come to church? And they said, oh, I don't need church. I can find God in my own house. You know what? That's a very arrogant and self-centered attitude, because you're assuming it's only about you. When people gather together, there is strength in numbers. It is wonderful. If you're in a worship service and there's 10 people, you get one atmosphere. If there's 20, you get a different one. You get 50, there's a different one. You get 100, you get a different one. You get 10,000, that's a different one as well. I'm not necessarily promoting every church needs to be a mega church, but if on Sunday morning, it sure feels a lot nicer when there's 30, 40, 50 people than if there's only 10. Okay. I think a lot of people get that concept. And there's lots of churches out there that you can choose from. Go to the one that feeds you spiritually, and then also the one where you can give back. You can be involved in things. You can be doing community service. This country was made great because churches, the people in those churches cared enough about their communities to start schools, to start hospitals, to start relief agencies, hospitals, schools, Red Cross, YMCA. No, it was not the Y. It was the Young Men's Christian Association. It was the Young Women's Christian Association. Okay, we need to get back to that. You want to change this country? We need to get back to that because that's what made this country great. The second thing, once you get past the Bible and all that, that's the foundation. The next one is, and I know I don't believe we do this, and Jim, you've heard this so many times from me. Every single conversation, if it comes up, government, politics, something like that, call your representatives, go to the town hall meetings, especially if it's like that the federal, it's your federal representative in this case, but even other ones as well. But anything they say, first question is it constitutional? And if it isn't, you say, why are you proposing this? Because you're asking me to be a criminal. Because the Constitution is the highest law of the land. Wow. And then it goes from there. And I know people will say, oh, that won't work. Well, it hasn't been tried.
Right.
We don't do this.
That's what I was going to say. That's the two questions you'll never see them ask a politician. Do they believe in God and do they believe in the Constitution? It'll never come up in a survey. It'll never come up in a debate because they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. And Fred, be direct. Do you believe in Jesus Christ?
I mean, I think when these guys come in town,
say the God word, just say Jesus Christ. Let's just know exactly where they're at, because there's all this talk about Muslims taking over the country. Well, Muslims believe in God.
Right. I don't mean a God. I mean the God. I would say Jesus Christ 100%. But the problem is we let these people would come in our towns, we wine and dine them, we treat them, they come and speak, but we never ask them how they believe and what they believe in and what do they believe in Jesus Christ. We never ask that question. Yeah. It never comes up.
We need to get deeper to that. So you got God, you've got so you got God, the church, be involved in that. Then you got politics, government, the Constitution is the groundwork there. And those two really wrap into the third one or fourth one. Family. We need to get back to family, because how the family goes, so goes society.
Yep.
So, Thanksgiving dinner is coming up. If you have a family, be a part of that. If you got that crazy relative that shows up, deal with it somehow. We need to try to restore family. And then simply community, which if you're doing these other things, you're obviously having an impact on your community. We need to be involved in the community in some fashion. If we're just sitting home watching Netflix, you're part of the problem.
Anti-Netflix.
You are part of the problem if you're just sitting home doing nothing, watching Netflix. And yes, you can be a keyboard warrior on Facebook and everything else like that. But you know what? I'm not sure how much good that does. It's great for sharing information. But God taught us that life is about relationships. First with Jesus Christ and the whole Trinity, the Holy Spirit and God the Father. And then second, it's about the people that we're around, family, community. It's all about relationships. And that only happens, I believe, and I believe we have the statistics now to back this up, that only happens when we're sitting down, breaking bread together and talking with one another face to face. Because if you look at statistics, and I used to work more with kids directly than I do now, so I suspect this is even worse. But actually, yeah, I have enough evidence to even back up this statement. That if you ask the kids back in like the 1980s, how many people do they really trust? People would name off a couple of friends really fast. Like, I really trust this person. I can think that instantly. If you ask kids today, who do they really trust? They're not really sure. They have one friend, two friends, something like that. But something that is more statistically shown, in 1980s, for example, 70s, 80s, when I grew up, No kids were on pharmaceutical drugs. Nobody was on depression. And I'm not saying we didn't have depression. I'm not saying people didn't think about even killing themselves. I think we've all been there to some degree. We all went through some bad times in our life where you feel really down and out and you're wondering, like, what is life all about? That has always happened. But statistically today, depression, anxiety, thoughts of suicide are through the roof. I mean, we are very, very unhappy as a society. And I think it's because we have these things as opposed to actually sitting down and having a cup of coffee with people. Maybe if there's a kid playing a game with them, like a board game, maybe taking a walk in the woods. I remember when I moved to Bradford 25 years ago, one of the things that really impressed me, and I came from the city, so it really wasn't as easy to do it there. Tough to do it when there's 4-lane traffic everywhere. People here in Bradford sat on their front porch. I was impressed. Today, when I walk the streets, nobody's sitting on their front porch.
Yeah. Jim, we're coming up on 20 minutes after 10, and this is an excellent. We ought to bring you back on a different Wednesday other than our Econ Recon, just to talk about this subject, because I really do believe that the answer to all these problems is with God and faith, not with the government. So we could go down. We could talk for another 2 hours on that subject, but let's talk about bringing you back on a non-economic situation where we can talk about solutions to right this country we have here outside the economic part of it. So, Fred, any closing thoughts for you?
I was going to agree with what he's saying. Hebrews 10:25, it says, do not forsake the assembly of the saints. We should be coming together to edify and build each other up. It's very clear. And the bottom line is money. My dad told me this for years. Money is either going to make you or break you, but you can't forget who your family is. You know what I mean? So some people get all caught up in that. And I'm sorry, COVID made internet church a thing. Well, you should be coming together with people of like faith. If you don't, you're not. Iron doesn't sharpen iron if you're hiding in a building and you're nowhere near that person.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you got to get together.
I agree. Jim, final thoughts?
I've said way too much. I'm done.
All right. Good deal. Fred, would you, as usual, pray us out of here, lift Jim up, and as we do for all our guests, and close us out of here with prayer.
Thank you, Lord. I just pray for this day. I ask, Lord, you pray for I pray that you touch all the listeners that are out there, that you send your Holy Spirit to edify and build them up. Protect us from this crazy world that we're living in, Lord. And we know that we can't do anything without you, Lord. And I ask, Lord, that you would continue to bring the darkness to the light, and that we would trust in you, and we would not trust in a system, but we would trust in the word of God to lead us, to guide us, to instruct us in where we should be and where we should go, Lord. And I just thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Fred. And thank you all for joining us today. I know we went a little bit long. We got to work on that sometimes.
Sorry.
No, that's all right, because it was good information. I do have to work on that. We got Bradford TV coming online, and we're under a little bit more constraints there, but as long as we're just doing what we're doing now, we're fine. But thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat station. So long, everybody. Have a wonderful day, by the way. I don't know, it's cold here, but wherever you are, have a wonderful day. Be blessed.
And be a blessing to others.
All right. See you.